Hey, welcome. Today I wanted to talk about gardening in light of this crazy coronavirus that's going around and how that should affect what we plant this year. Alright, so there's not going to be that much different about planting this year as other years for me, other than I'm probably going to plant less flowers and I'm going to try to plant my plants closer together, produce as much as I can on my little piece of land here. I would say the first consideration when you're planting out in your garden, especially if you want to try to extend your garden as long as possible, is how are you going to store the food? So don't grow food for canning if you've never canned before and don't plan on canning. So grow food that does well with freezing if you're not into canning, or dry your food. If you have a dehydrator, grow food that you're going to use a dehydrator for, and the idea is to just store up some extra in case there's little hiccups in our food transportation. So the number one way that I'm going to talk about storing food is with canning. The number one food I would grow for canning is tomatoes. They're very versatile food and they grow really well a lot of places that I've lived. And another consideration is that this can be made into many different types of dishes. So tomatoes are great in salsa. They're great in pasta sauces. You can store them whole, you can make paste with them. The number one food I would grow for canning is tomatoes. The number two I would grow for canning is cabbage. Cabbage is great as a sauerkraut or as kimchi. And those last a long period of time. They sort of mix up your flavor palettes and they're really high in probiotics and a lot of micronutrients which we need. The number three thing I'd focus on for canning is pickling. And I'm just going to group all these together in the pickling group. So cucumbers, green beans, radishes, and carrots. Those are all great ones to pickle and are a nice mix up in the flavor palette also, especially in the wintertime. This next list I'm going to tackle has to do with root cellars. So if you have a root cellar, this is the list you want to look at. So potatoes are my number one on my list. Potatoes, I heard some guy lived off these for a year, having these, supplementing with vitamin C and a few other vitamins. He lived on almost solely potatoes for a year. The number two thing I would grow would be carrots. Carrots are high in beta carotene, and carrots actually you can keep in the ground for a long period of time. They will survive through a number of freezes without any harm to them. The problem is digging them up. So once it freezes, it's a little hard to get them out of the ground. But carrots are my number two. My number three are onions. How many onions here? So at this time of year, you can get a bag of 100 onions like this for anywhere from $2 to like $6. 100 onions, it's probably more than what most people would use throughout a year. But if you're into onions and you want to store them for a long period of time, I hear shallots are a better way to go because they store longer, hard and firm, and have the similar flavor profile as onions do. My number four for storing in a root cellar would be a winter squash. Some sort of variety of winter squash. They can store from anywhere from 3 to 6 months. I think some might even go longer, but they're great food to have around because you can put them in soups and pies and breads, and they're very versatile food also to cook up. The third method would be using a dehydrator, which I use all the time at home, especially in late summer, early fall. My number one thing to dry in there is fruit. And if you don't have a fruit tree, I'm sure you can find someone who has a fruit tree somewhere. Or you can even check on Craigslist. If you don't know anyone who has a fruit tree, people post listings on there to have people come pick their fruit off their tree because too many are falling to the ground and attracting hornets and wasps and yellow jackets. And so ask around and check that out later in the summer. My number two on my list is sunflowers. I'm not going to be growing a lot of flowers this year, but I will be growing sunflowers because sunflower seeds are a great treat to have. My number three would be just herbs, any sort of herbs. Lots of people have rosemary plants sitting outside just as a decorative plant. So check around and you can find herbs to dry. So my number four would be peppers. Peppers are another great item to have to mix into dishes to mix up your flavor profile. My fourth method I'm going to touch on is freezing. My number one thing to freeze are berries. And you don't even need to have berry bushes like blueberries or strawberries or raspberries or blackberries. But a lot of times there are U-picks in the city, or you can go out in the wild and find them. And when I lived in Seattle, I would harvest blackberries for like an entire month and make pies out of them and freeze them. And so check around. Berries are a great one for freezing. My number 2 for freezing are beans. Bush beans or pole beans, they're great ones to freeze. And my number 3 would be corn. My number 4 would be peas. So another item I didn't put on the list for storing is actually growing some greens that last throughout the winter. And if you live in a place with a very mild winter, there are a few greens that you could grow that could possibly survive all through the winter, and you could pick off them even if you have a greenhouse or not. Top 4 on my list are kale, chard, spinach, and carrots. Those 4 can survive freezes and light snows, and they are a great one to grow in the late autumn season and hopefully provide greens for your family all through the winter. So I hope that list helped and was enlightening and maybe helped shoot you in some direction for your garden. All right, till the next one. Catch you around. Bye.